That looks good.
Okay, fine.
Today I'm going to do the dissection of the human heart. I've already dissected the heart. It takes a while, so I'm not going to dissect it in front of you, but I'm going to compare a sheep heart to a human heart. And this is the model of the human heart that you've been asked to look at under the images database. So let me take it off its stand. And in your body, this is how the heart is placed. So this is the anterior or sternocostal surface. This is the posterior surface or the base, and this portion on which sits on my hand, that is the diaphragmatic or inferior surface. Now here you see this is the right atrium in blue because it's receiving all venous blood. This is the right ventricle. This is the left ventricle, separated by the interventricular sulcus, where you see these blood vessels. In fact, they are indicative of where the sulcus lies. This is the auricle of the right atrium. This is the left atrium, and this is the auricle of the left atrium. Only a little bit of the auricle shows on the anterior surface. Most of the left atrium is present on the posterior surface, as you can see here. Now, entering the right atrium are two major veins, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. These are the two largest veins. And then we also have the entry of the coronary sinus, which is present here. So this enters going from left to right. Other openings which you see in the right atrium are the atrioventricular opening, which is this one. And this is where the atrium communicates with the right ventricle. So the right atrial blood enters the right ventricle. And these are the caval openings up here. And in the right atrial wall, the wall which separates it from the left atrium, which is called the interatrial septum, you have a depression which is known as the fossa ovalis. Now this is the right ventricle, where you see the atrioventricular opening. These are the cusps. It's a tricuspid valve which guard it. And then this is the exit out of the right ventricle going into the pulmonary trunk. It's shown in blue even though it's an artery because it's carrying deoxygenated blood. Then let's look at the left ventricle and left atrium together. So this is the left ventricle, much thicker wall, the interventricular septum separating it from the right ventricle. This is the bicuspid or mitral valve which makes the left atrium communicate with the left ventricle. And then here we have, you can't see the opening, but about here, a little posteriorly, is where the left ventricle sends its blood out through the aortic opening into the aorta. Now the left atrium has the pulmonary arteries opening into, the pulmonary veins opening into it, but they're shown in red even though they are veins because they carry oxygenated blood. So you have two up here and two on the other side. So I've gone over this a little hurriedly because I want to concentrate mainly on the sheep heart so that you can look at the cusps and the semilunar valves and so on. Now let's look at an undissected sheep heart which is here. Unlike the human heart, the anterior interventricular sulcus and posterior interventricular sulcus do not show up that clearly, but you can see a thin line going across over here. This is a little bit of rust which gathered, and that divides it into a right ventricle, and this is the left ventricle, this being the apex of the heart. This is the right auricle, so this is the rest of the right atrium. This is the left auricle, and then this is the left atrium posteriorly. I've put this little bit of tissue paper inside to just show you openings. Now in the right atrium, this is the right atrium, this is the superior vena cava, and here this is the inferior vena cava. So I'm going to pull this down this way and you can see it move. You can see it moving. I'm also going to try and put my probe through to show you how they are continuous here. So you can see that. So this is the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, which open into the right atrium. Then exiting from the right ventricle is the pulmonary trunk, which you see here. This is the pulmonary trunk. It's an artery, so it has a thick wall. See that? It's a thick wall. This is the left ventricle, and exiting from the left ventricle is the aorta, which lies behind the pulmonary artery. So here it is. This is the aorta in which you have this. And then finally this is the left atrium, and opening into the left atrium you have these pulmonary arteries. These little, I've put these papers come out, so these are the pulmonary arteries opening into. Now let me show you the dissected specimen. So this is a dissected specimen. So again, this is the right ventricle. This is the thin sulcus which is going through it. You can see this thin blood vessel which is the vein. This is the right ventricle. This is the left ventricle. Right auricle, left auricle. This is the rest of the right atrium, and then the left atrium is present posteriorly. Now I'm going to start with the right atrium. This is the superior vena cava opening up here, and this is the inferior vena cava opening. And what I did is I made a slit right through so that I could open up the right atrium, and here you can see it opened up. See how most of it is smooth, and then where the auricle is, you can see it has this rough part which we call the musculi pectinati. So you can see this thing looking like the teeth of a comb, so that's why it's called the musculi pectinati. So here is the inferior vena cava opening, here is the superior vena cava opening. Then we have the atrioventricular opening or the tricuspid opening, and there, if you can see in there, that's the atrioventricular opening, the right atrioventricular opening. And the opening of the coronary sinus is up here. If you look here, I'm going to put my little probe in there. That's the opening of the coronary sinus. You don't see openings of the venae cordis minimi because they're really small. In fact, actually you can see one over here, very, very small. So that's the right atrium. Now let's open up the right ventricle, which is here. The first thing we see is this tricuspid opening from the right atrium into the right ventricle. So you can see my probe has come out through there. I'm going to pull it apart, and here you're looking at the cusps. See these cusps here? You all must obviously be wondering what's this thing going right across. This is part of the conducting system which is known as the moderator band. So this is going right across. But let me cut this out so that it doesn't get in the way. And now you can see the cusps. See the cusps and see the chordae tendineae attached to the cusps. This is one papillary muscle here. You can see I'm pulling on the chordae tendineae and they are attached to the cusps. Pull this down. You can see the other cusps over here, the chordae tendineae, and this is another papillary muscle. This is part of the interventricular septum, which is separating the right ventricle from the left ventricle. So this is how blood enters into the right ventricle from the right atrium through this atrioventricular opening. And once it's entered here, it now passes out through the pulmonary orifice, which is this one. So you can see that the pulmonary orifice is more anteriorly placed. And this pulmonary orifice is also guarded by valves, but these are not cusps like those. These are semilunar cusps. And if you can zoom in, you can see this really good. See, these are the semilunar cusps. And see, this is the sinus, this little space up here. It's like a little cul-de-sac. This is the sinus. So these are semilunar cusps. So shouldn't make a mistake between semilunar cusps and the other cusps which are present in the atrioventricular orifices. Now let's look at the left ventricle. This is the left ventricle. Look at the thick left ventricular wall. See how thick it is. And see the right one. So you can see how much thicker this is. 3 times as thick as this. And here you have 2 openings. One is the left atrioventricular opening, which has only 2 cusps. So here's one, and then there's one at the back, and here you can see the chordae tendon. You can also see a nice papillary muscle up here. And then we have the aortic opening, which is this one. And see, in the aortic opening too, look at the semilunar cusps. So see this? This is the semilunar, This is the semilunar cusp seen in the aortic opening up here. Okay. There. So that's the semilunar cusp up here in the aortic opening, and this is the cusp which has the chordae tendineae attached to it of the atrioventricular opening. The left atrium, this is the auricle, and then these are the pulmonary veins which are opening into it. When you open up the left atrial wall, you can see most of it is smooth, and the only part which is rough is the part which is present in the auricle. So I'll cut this so that you can see that. So here it's rough where you have the musculi pectinati, and the rest of it is smooth, and here this is the mitral opening going from the left atrium into the left ventricle. You can see it entering here into the left ventricle. So just as the muscle in the atria were called musculi pectinati, in the ventricles, remember, they were called trabeculae carni because they are so big. Now the last specimen that I'd like you to see is a section which just cuts through the ventricular chambers, and this is just showing you the interventricular septum. Look at this. This is the interventricular septum. If you remember, I told you it curved towards the right atrium. So you can see, towards the right ventricle. So you can see that the right ventricular cavity is, sickle shaped, whereas the left ventricular cavity is kind of more rounded. Also look at how thick the left ventricle, the walls of the left ventricle are compared to that of the right ventricle. Now after having done this, knowing the parts of the heart should be easy for you, and as I've given you in your lab, you must know the cardiac cycle, which means you must know what enters, how it exits, what openings guard these exits, and what valves are present.